Before we get started, I do want to start by recognizing that we are here tonight as treaty people bound by a covenant to one another and to this land. So whether it is our ancestors have deep roots here or we have recently arrived, all of us have an obligation to care for one another and be good stewards to our land. This is why we are starting by recognizing the Huron-Wendat and the Mississauga of the New Credit and reminding ourselves of our obligations. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land. My name is Robin Connolly, and I am the Director of Community Relations at Toronto Pearson. This is our third quarterly public meeting of our Community Environment and Noise Advisory Committee, or as we call CENAC. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, CENAC is a forum of discussion between the community, the GTAA, and our aviation partners about matters relating to the mitigation of aircraft noise in the community and the operation of the airport in a sustainable and responsible fashion. The CENAC committee itself is made up of elected officials and residents from Mississauga, Brampton, Toronto, and the regions of Halton, Durham, and York. The committee also includes technical members represent Transport Canada, NAV Canada, the National Airlines Council of Canada, the GTAA, and we also have a technical acoustician who provides support and advice to the committee. The CENAC members themselves partake in educational tutorials, workshop sessions, and technical briefings on the airport's operations and programs to ensure that the community's voice is always part of our work. These quarterly meetings, these public meetings, are our opportunity to share back on what we've been working on to the wider, broader public. So just quick, allow me to introduce the folks who are joining at the head table today. We have Michael Belanger, who is with the GTA and the Director of our Aviation Programs and Compliance. Jonathan Bagg, who is a Senior Manager of Public Affairs with NAV Canada, and Clifford Frank, who is the Associate Director of Operations West for Transport Canada, and of course me. Before I hand it over to Jim to facilitate the meeting for us, I just want to say to those who are perhaps attending for the first time, the first hour of these meetings are formal presentations, and the second hour we open up the floor to wider public comment, and of course we will balance that with any questions or comments that may be also coming from us, from the folks at home and online. So with all that said, I'll hand it over to Jim to facilitate our meeting.
Hello, my name is Jim Fott. I'm from Lura Consulting, so I don't work for Transport Canada, NAV Canada, GTA. I work for Lura Consulting, which is a firm that does third-party neutral facilitation at all sorts of meetings and engagement across Canada. I also think we should also recognize the 28 people who have registered to be live streamed. So you will see the video of this meeting after the meeting on the website. The last 3 are on there, and 28 people have joined us. So when we get to the question period, we'll alternate between your questions and comments and feedback and the people online, so we can make sure that they can participate in the meeting as well. So the agenda, if you have it in front of you, is to start with a presentation on how and why we monitor noise. Colin Novak will do that. An update on Idea 5, the weekend runway alteration test. Helios, Nick is here to update us on that. And an update on NAV Canada's 6 ideas. Jonathan Bagg will give us an update on the 6 ideas. And then the public comment period will start roughly at approximately 7:30, and will be about an hour for comments. And as I said, we'll alternate between those who are joining us at home, live streamed, and those who are here in the room. So with that, I'll hand it over to Colin to start the first presentation. Just hold your questions, and we'll have time for questions at the end.
Hey everybody, thank you for coming and thank you for having me. I've been asked to give a short presentation on noise monitoring terminals, and more specifically on how and why we would monitor aircraft noise. There's two components to monitoring aircraft noise. We have the hardware side, and we also have the software. I want to give a quick overview on both of those. Most of my comments are with respect to what GTAA has for Pearson Airport. Some of them are a little general on the technology itself. An NMT, or a noise monitoring terminal, essentially it's an outdoor weather-resistant case that has instrumentation inside of it, specifically a Type 1 sound level meter, Type 1 being the most precise of a field-type noise measuring device, and it has also a outdoor microphone that's built to withstand the rigors of weather in Canada all year round. The data is measured in real time, and it's communicated via 3G cellular communication to servers in Australia, Melbourne, Australia, which looks after the service of airports globally from around the world. The number and location of NMT installations is decided following a fairly rigorous criteria, which I'll talk about in a minute. On the software side, GTAA uses something called ANOMS, which stands for Airport Noise Monitoring and Management. Both the hardware and the software side is provided by a company called EMS Brew & Care. The install base of this particular software is about 250 airports globally, which is about 70% of the install base. What the software does, it integrates the real-time noise data with the specific flight operations and the specific aircraft flying over top. It provides a data bank of historical data that can be either viewed in real time, or it's archived and it can go back and you can generate reports and do all sorts of analysis further on down. It also has other tools that can be used, customized in different airports, approaches from different aspects. But another component that I also want to point out that's very valuable in the work that we do, that most people don't think about, are the portable noise monitors. These are typically used to do investigation, determine what soundscapes are due to aircraft impact within areas that don't have permanent noise monitors. And essentially they're the same thing from an instrumentation perspective inside. They're just much more mobile and can be moved around. So why is noise aircraft monitoring important? Well, first of all, we need to document what the noise levels are, and this is true for both arrivals and departures. Want to know how loud they are and what the impacts are on our communities. And we also want to be able to track this data and correlate it with actual flight operations. That way we know what is being caused by operations and what is just community noise, and we can differentiate between those two. We also want to understand what those impacts, real impacts, are on the communities. And what I mean by that, a lot of studies are done using predictive modeling. We have all sorts of metrics that are determined using theoretical inputs from aircraft manufacturers, that along with traffic volume data, and we can get all sorts of predictions of numbers, for example, time above a certain area, that. But those are just predictions, and sometimes the input data can be somewhat sterile. With a noise monitoring terminal, we can get real data, and we can correlate between the predicted and what the actuals are. That way we can better understand also the impacts of the input that we're putting into these noise models. It's also a very valuable tool for community relations. I think it's very important that there be transparency, and that is there at this airport in terms of the web track, which you can see on the web, where you can see in almost real time. There's a delay on there, but you can actually see what the impacts are from the aircraft, and it's tying that data into actual flight operations. So this is a typical NMT installation. This is one of the ones that is here in the GTA. Here we go. So this is the NMT itself, and this is the sound level meter that I was talking about. And down here we have an industrial type modem that sends the data via 3G. They're AC powered typically, although some of them can be solar powered, but we don't have that in Toronto. And we have redundancy of battery backup as well, with one battery here and another battery mounted in behind. So this is an overall picture of it. There's the monitor itself, and there's the microphone up at the top. Typically, these will can be brought down, or the mast will tilt, so you can access the microphones that are on top. But to ensure quality of the data, the meters themselves in the microphone system are calibrated every day using something called a charge injection calibration, where there's a charge inputted in the microphone, and it's compared from day to day to make sure that there's a consistency. And then on top of that, annually they're inspected, and then they're calibrated with a laboratory-grade pistophone as well. And then over here, we see the portable noise monitor. Inside the Pelican case, you essentially have the same thing as what you have in here, except for it'll be all battery powered, and there may or may not be a modem, but it has the same microphone. These can be deployed sometimes for a part of a day, sometimes up to several weeks at a time. So how do we pick a location that warrants a permanent installation? Well, first of all, it has to be in close proximity to the flight path. It doesn't make a lot of sense to measure the noise or monitor the noise if we don't have aircraft flying over top. And we don't need the redundancy in terms of the data, so we wouldn't normally put these close to where another NMT is already located. We do want to have them in close proximity to sensitive areas, so they're typically located around residential areas. Some of them in Toronto are right within the community, mounted on hydro poles or lamp posts. Some are mounted on top of schools, community centers, etc. We don't want to put them in high background ambient levels areas, such as near busy roadways, factories, etc. We also have to have access to utility to power them. We no longer need to have phone lines, since we do everything cellular, and we also have to have areas that have relatively good security. Some are mounted at fire stations, ambulance stations. Billy Bishop has one actually on a police station as well. And we also have to be cognizant of what the terrain is. We don't want to have them near buildings, so because we want to avoid reflections of the noise, which would artificially raise the sound levels. We also don't want to have the microphone too close to the ground, where the ground is going to absorb some of the energy. So all of the microphones are at least 20 feet up in the air. So in 2015, one of the initiatives of GTA's 5-year noise management action plan was to do a review of the existing install base of the NMTs. And this was recognized as a need due to the traffic volumes and operations since the last review had been done. So a working group was formed by CENAC. The work involved substantial field measurements using some of these portable units. In some cases, several days to several weeks worth of data was collected. It was all analyzed, and the recommendation from the working group was that 9 additional sites were warranted. Recommendation was taken, and all 8 of them were installed by the end of last summer. So this is where the present 25 NMTs are located. And if you look at the lobes of the noise contours, if you can picture them in your head, or even what the approach and takeoff directions are, you can see the lobe there, the lobe there, a lobe there, and a lobe there. So just by looking at the map, you can tell for the most part that the NMTs are where you would expect them to be, as well as we have some that are further out in Vaughan and Castleloma area, and also in Holt Hills and Oakville. Those are some of the newer ones. So What can we measure with the NMT, and what does it really mean? Well, they're essentially any metric, noise metric that can be calculated can be determined from a noise monitor. What they're measuring is the sound pressure, the physical sound pressure. It's converted to a sound pressure level. And then we can calculate various metrics depending on how you're going to use that data. The most common of all the metrics used globally would be the equivalent sound level, where that's the average of the acoustic energy over a specified period of time. And when you're reporting this LEQ, it's very important that you also include what the duration of that was, because you can appreciate that a 1 second average is going to be different and mean something different than a 1 minute or even a 1 hour. But they all have their use and purposes of analyzing what the sounds mean and what the impacts are going to be. An Lmax is just simply that. It's the maximum level that's reported over a specified period of time. So if you have an aircraft flyover, the max level would be when it's in the nearest vicinity to the receiver point. LN, which is a statistical measurement, is the noise level that's exceeded N% of the time. So that N is a number from 1 to 100. These can be very useful in determining, again, what the impacts are. So if you think about an L10, which is the level exceeded 10% of the time, these would be the high impact sounds. So that would be perhaps an aircraft flying directly over top, or it could be a car honking its horn, or children going by on a bicycle making a lot of loud noise. Or on the other extreme, the L90 would be the overall ambient background. So when we're looking at the noise data and trying to do analysis and make sense of this stuff, these are some of the parameters that we look at to identify where the problems are and what the relative impacts are to the ambient. SEL is the sound exposure level, and this can be very useful as well because events can take different periods of time. Some aircraft events could happen much quicker than another one, and you want to be able to evaluate these all on par with each other. So what the SEL will do is it'll take that sound and normalize it over a 1 second period. This is initially put together at the beginning of jet aircraft, because jet aircraft in the early days were very, very loud, yet much faster than propeller aircraft. So we needed some sort of metric to compare apples to apples with these different time events. The effective perceived noise level, this is an attempt to add other components to the physical measurement of the noise, and what they're trying to do here is add factor. So they'll take other components of the noise, such as the frequency spectra or modulation or how long it takes, and we add weighting factors to try to add an annoyance component to it. And that's sort of done also with the LDN, which is the day, evening, night. This is a single valued number to represent a 24-hour period. However, in the evening and the nighttime, we're more sensitive to noise. For example, at nighttime, they'll take the actual measured sound levels and they'll weight them by 10 dB because of that sensitivity. It's a very useful number because it gives us a single value number to represent an entire day, yet at the same time, it could be overly generalized compared to some of the other metrics that I'm talking about. And then the last one is the third octave spectrum. This could be very useful for analyzing different types of aircraft and the impacts that they would have. For example, the A320 has a tonal component to it that would show up on a 1/3 octave spectrum. So if you wanted to do an analysis of one of the aircraft with a retrofit and one without, this would be an excellent metric to be able to do that. These are just some of the shots of screenshots that ANOMS is capable of doing. For example, this is that third octave with the third dimension of time. So we have amplitude, frequency versus time. So it's just slices of time, and what we could see is how the frequency spectra changes of a flyover over time. And this would be the same thing of frequency, but mapping it out as an SEL. Or we could just look at a very simple LEQ That could be either anywhere from a 1 second LEQ, 1 minute LEQ, or even longer. With the ANOM software that goes with the NMT, there's other information that's also reported. This is I know you can't really see it, but this is an example spreadsheet report that an operator could get from an NMT, and they could choose what metrics they're going to want to see. But it also includes the aircraft details, right down to the flight number, the position, the altitude, etc. It gives us the weather conditions, because the weather can also impact the amplitude of the noise as we measure it. It gives us the event durations, and it could even record the signal, where we could go in there, we could click it, and hear the aircraft fly over on the specific recording. The software even goes as far as being able to map out flight paths. So what else can we do with the data? It can be used for special projects, such as to measure the impacts in real time of construction projects or runway maintenance, where that can be monitored. We see the same thing in other industries, such as the mining industry, where they'll monitor the noise, and when they see that the impacts are getting to an elevated level, you can take corrective action early on. It can also be used as a research tool. There's a project right now, a 3-year research project with the University of Windsor, investigating as part of the project the social impacts from aircraft noise, and having access to this historic data. They can do correlation evaluations between the actual noise levels and say, public surveys. It's also a very effective way of measuring the results of different mitigation attempts. There's a number of initiatives that are being tried, and we could use, or the airport can use, the noise monitoring data to evaluate the effectiveness of some of these initiatives. It's also a great community relations tool. Again, I'm an advocate of providing the information out there to the public, as well as it can be used as an education tool. I want to thank you for listening. I think questions are going to be later, right?
Sure, and I just wanted to provide some context that having Colin here and sharing this information with us is an excellent baseline, because a couple of the big deliverables of our 5-year noise management action plan include updating and reporting on our noise metrics and what that looks like, as well as a fly quiet program. And of course, if we don't have the right installation of NMTs around the airport to capture what some of those procedural changes look like and what that league table might look like, then we won't have the right infrastructure in place to deliver on that pivot. So, you know, we have some good foundations to work with. So we just wanted to share that information today.
So general feedback and comments and questions are at 7:30. But any direct questions about that?
Well, I can't.
So much just the microphone wasn't working exactly. Just so those online, what are you going to do with the data, basically, is the summary of the question.
Yeah, I can't speak directly on what is being done with the data right now. I don't work for the airport. I'm a consultant. I work with the equipment. I maintain and install the equipment, and I also provide consulting services. I'm an acoustician. What I tried to do here is show what some of the airports, or what many of the airports are doing with the data, and also what some of the other initiatives that are being discussed of what can be done with the data.
Question back here. Introduce yourself, please. Is the microphone working now? Yeah. Oh, turn it on. Okay.
Sure, I can, if you don't mind, just before we go to the next question about what we do with the data. We certainly do measure impacts to understand operational impacts, and it helps us set a baseline for how we currently are operating. And as we explore any procedural changes or changes of flight paths, for example, which are part of the 6 ideas, we're then able to go back to the monitoring data and understand whether the modeled benefits or impacts did manifest and how that looked. And as well, I would also just add that aircraft are actually generally themselves regulated and monitored at source. And so aircraft, and that's done by Transport Canada. And so an aircraft is identified by a chapter, and that indicates what level of noise that they emit. And so in Canada, like I said, sorry, Transport Canada does that work. And at Pearson, we have 95% of our fleet are Chapter 4 or newer. So that means that we have Chapter 4 is a very quiet aircraft. We have a very quiet fleet, but that is predominantly how airports manage those noise impacts on communities is at the source, at how aircraft are regulated.
Great, thank you. Robin, next question over here. Just introduce yourself and use the mic so people at home can hear you.
My name is Maria. Colin, you had mentioned that the noise monitoring terminals are positioned near flight paths. And you had mentioned that the information you have provided was from the list was from 2015.
That's
when you changed, sorry, some of them were changed. There was some additions in 2015. Did I say that correctly?
due to the 2015 initiative. It was suggested that a reevaluation be done, and that was done in 2016. The recommendations were made in the fall of 2016, I believe, and the installation began in the spring of 2017.
Okay, so I've heard from several of these meetings that no flight paths have changed since 2012, so that these noise monitoring systems should have been in those flight paths that had no changes since 2012, and they were 2015 to 2016. And you mentioned that 9 additional ones had been added, but I'm more concerned about the ones that were removed, because if no flight paths had changed since 2012, and you added some in 2015, why were there some that were removed in that time frame? Yeah, they were.
There were none removed after that. Prior to 2012, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, prior to 2012 from the earlier assessment, there were some that were moved. Well, they weren't removed, they were relocated, I understand. That was in 2012.
Okay, because that's my biggest question, is the ones that are closest to where I live, really, I don't think would justify what I'm hearing. Where the one was removed, I think would have been perfect if it would have stayed where it was. And if you don't mind me saying, that one would have been St. Eugene. So now the closest ones we have to the area is Richview, which is not picking up what I'm hearing, or the one near Blackbriar, which also doesn't pick that up. And if they're saying that Blackbriar is the one closest to me, then I have a huge problem with that, because thanks to the GTA, I did get the information that of the almost 71,000 noise events captured in the last year for number 31, which is Blackfriar, 61.3%, or roughly 43,000, were due to aircraft. That's a problem for me.
I wasn't involved in the study prior to 2012, so I can't speak to why the one near your place was relocated. I was involved with the relocation in 2012, 2013. The only evaluation I can speak to is the one that we did in 2016, because I was the one that did all the measurements, and at that time we evaluated that the 17 that were in place at that time were effective for where they were located, and then based on feedback from the community, supported by field measurements, that's when we evaluated and recommended the additional 8.
Time for one more question. Back here? Do you have a question back there? Yes. Let's do one more now. Then we have 2 more presentations. Then we'll come back to the general questions at the end. I'll get to you.
Hi, my name is Maya, and this is one of my first meetings. And I live south of Bristol in a condominium. And I really like what you said about WebTrack, that it's out there for us to see. I've heard there are some accuracy problems with WebTrack, but whenever I check WebTrack, the airplanes are going along Matheson. I live 1 kilometer south of Matheson. I have pictures of aircrafts barely clearing my condo. So I live up in the air, and you guys are maybe 500 feet away from me, and there are no noise monitoring systems there. So I have a problem with yeah.
I have to hold on.
It's south of Matheson, between 403 and Ontario. I have here an email from your department regarding my request to have portable noise monitoring in the area. It was done on August 23rd for 2 hours. I have the report. It was written and sent to me by email just 1 week ago. So my request was done in May 1st. So it took you 4 months and a half to have this monitoring done. And you sent me like a PDF without any other explanation, just some measurements, which me as a citizen, I do not understand because I don't have studies in aviatics or whatever it is. No conclusion. What does it mean? All these values, which are over 70 decibel in that area, where the aircrafts are not going in their normal flat pipe that they should go. They come diagonally south toward Matheson Boulevard and even more. No matter if it's summer, if it's winter, even in winter is worse. They are coming just straight above the houses. So this is what we need to know. Why there is in this area, there is not a permanent monitoring. We are 4 kilometers away from the end of the runway 24 west toward Mississauga. 4 kilometers, there is a bunch of hundreds of houses there, and there is no monitoring permanently there for us. So I want to know that, and I want to know why the planes are coming diagonally south when they should be above the industrial area, maybe around Britannia Road or 401 Road until they turn south at the level of the Terry Fox or wherever they go.
I can't speak specifically.
No, I think we can ask Cynthia to address these questions. So if we can get a mic to Cynthia, that'd be great. Thank you. This is Cynthia Woods, Manager of Noise Management Office, if you don't mind.
So first of all, as far as the report, I apologize if there wasn't enough context provided, and we're happy to... Right.
Well, let her respond. Can you let her respond, please? She's responding to you, so just let her respond.
So we're happy to...
Can I understand this?
Yeah, I agree.
Can you...
Chart the normal range for decibel in my area, which should be expected to be, and what does it mean, this measurement?
She's trying to respond to you. Can you let her respond, please?
Yes.
So I'm happy to follow up with more analysis of that report. We do provide the data, what the average is, the number of events, so we can interpret that. As far as a permanent noise monitor, we do have permanent noise monitors in certain areas, and it does, it doesn't just measure noise that's relevant to the area that it's in. It does, we wouldn't put another NMT in within a few kilometers of an existing NMT, but that's why we have the portable monitor. That does give us the opportunity to go into areas that aren't served by a permanent monitor, which is what we've done in your case, but again, we can do a better job of providing you with more interpretation. As far as the flight paths go, I think I'll pass that over to NAV Canada to respond.
Sure, I can help explain probably what you're observing there. So. I'm just a loud talker. I thought everybody could hear me. Okay, so in terms of what you're observing in terms of the operation, there are different types of aircraft taking off at the airport, some that are faster, some that are slower. So what happens is a lot of these slower aircraft on takeoff will turn, and that'll allow us to take off another plane behind it. So that's why they're not proceeding directly on runway heading. They actually bank. That is a normal procedure. It allows us to clear more aircraft and keep them moving along. But that isn't a new operation, but it's certainly one that would explain why you can observe some aircraft.
One that goes south, a level of, let's say, Tomken or whatever, the one that are small engine.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the ones who are going straight, and instead of keeping the direction above the industrial area, they are coming diagonally on the Mississauga residents.
I think maybe it would be easiest to have you chat with Jonathan after the meeting so that he can get in specifically. We can pull up a map and get into what's impacting you. Thank you.
So I'm going to move on. We have 2 more presentations. We still have an hour at the end for questions, so we'll come back to your questions still standing. So we'll turn it over to Nick now to talk about Idea 5, the weekend runway alternation test that happened this summer.
Sure. Just before Nick gets started, I wanted to just also provide some context and introduction. As you know, our latest noise management action plan includes some very ambitious initiatives, which actually for many of them will be the first airport in Canada that will have implemented them. And it's of course important that we implement these initiatives based on international best practice and of course also what fits and works for our environment here in Canada. And so in order to be able to move forward with our noise management action plan, we do want to work with a technical consultant who can help us, who brings that breadth of experience and can help us scope and develop and execute on the initiatives in the noise management action plan. So I'm happy to share after a search and a process that Helios has won that contract of work and has come on board to help us build out our noise management action plan. So that includes our friend here, Nick Bowd. And so for those of you who have been coming to these meetings or involved on a number of different initiatives, he is a very familiar face. And so we are of course very thrilled that this work has gone to Helios. They of course undertook the noise management best practices study for us, and so have that breadth of understanding there, and have a really deep operational understanding of our airspace and our airport here in Toronto. So we think we have the right partner to help bring us forward and build out this plan. So that is why you see a fairly jet-lagged Nick Bowd in front of us here this evening. And so, yeah, he'll give an update on Idea 5 and what happened this summer, which of course is part of the Noise Management Action Plan under the idea of runway usage. So, Nick, welcome back.
Thank you very much. And it is 2 years since I first stood at a CENAC meeting in September and spoke about the terms of reference for the NAV Canada study that we were commissioned to do on looking at the airspace around Toronto. So it's amazing how fast 2 years has gone. And back then, one of the criticisms I heard 100 times over, if not more, was there's no action. And I totally get that. And finally, I'm pleased to be here and able to do the preliminary results of the first trial that has taken place. The 6 ideas did not stem from the Helios work. They were already in train when we came on 2 years ago. But I am hoping that this is the first of many presentations talking about initiatives being trialled and learning from them and making a difference. So congratulations to getting to this point, and let's press on. So I'm going to cover a few parts of this. We're just going to give you a reminder of what the concept was for the weekend trial, for those that didn't have a chance to attend the consultation or can't remember what Idea 5 was or what weekend alternation was about, go through that. Then I'll look at some of the feedback that's been received during the trial, just some key figures, how much the feedback's been, and touch a little bit on that before looking at the operational performance. The operational performance at this stage is just pure data analysis. Just to have a see how much have we been able to, or the airport and NAV Canada, been able to achieve the operation that we had hoped would happen with weekend alternation, and then just a quick cover as to what the next steps are from here, because this, as I said, is only the preliminary analysis. The trial only ended 4 days ago, and some of these numbers here were still being worked on by myself this afternoon, and I was being chased, wanting to know when the presentation was available to be uploaded for those people online. So it is new stuff, and hence we've got work to do. So the concept was that on alternating weekends, there would be an ability to provide relief to 2 parts of the surrounding area to the airport. So on sort of what's here is termed Group A weekends, or previously been called odd weekends, either first, the third, the fifth weekends in any pattern. The relief would be given to the northeast and the southwest quadrants, and this relief is for those people on the straight in, for an arrival coming straight into the airport, and the period when a departure has taken off and is on its straight out climb. The relief is not further away from the airport. This measure is focused on those closer in on the straight flight sections. On the following weekend, the operation is adjusted such that the northwest and southeast areas get the relief. So that was the concept overall. It says partial relief because there are points when the airport is busy and you can't do all of the arrivals onto one runway. You do have to put some there and put some on the second runway. So hence it's not 100% relief, it's partial relief. But the point of the test was to give people the chance to experience it and also to test it operationally and see whether the actual operation could deliver what had been modelled. And as ever, what you can do in assumed theoretical modelling is going to be different to what happens in reality. So what have we heard from the communities during this period? It's only been 8 weekends. As aviation testing goes, that is very, very short. Often tests can run 6 months, a year, but this was an initial, let's try it, let's let people experience it, because during the consultation, saying you will experience relief means nothing until you've actually had a chance to see what that might mean. But Area A that we were looking at just now is shown in blue on here, and Area B, the green segments. The black markers show where the feedback has come from, and that's then been classified by the GTAA into either Group A or Group B. Those that fall outside of those two catchment areas, and there's 4% which are unknown, where the location hasn't been declared in the feedback, and therefore GTAA can't say where it's come from. So that gives you an idea, and as would be expected, the areas that were targeted for relief is where the majority of the feedback has come from, which is good. That's the people that we want to hear from particularly. Then GTAA have taken that data, and it's free text. This was a voluntary feedback. There were no set questions. It was done in real time, tended to follow a few days after each weekend. They would receive the feedback. And it was then just reading through the free text, classified, and one person's response could fall into 2 or 3 categories, depending what they said within that free text. But it was just trying to pull out what were the key messages that the person was trying to portray. In total, there have been 218 feedback received by the airport, and that could have come online, via email or telephone calls. And within that, there are 164 individual names, although 39 of them came from the same device. We can tell that from the IP address that it's come from, all with different names and no text filled in. So the 164 includes it, but I do put a caveat, there are 39 blank ones in there. So, but you can see there that the most comments that have come back are about noise complaint and night flights, which, yes, we know noise complaints, we know night flights are an issue. Unfortunately, this trial was at weekends and during the day. So, yes, the noise complaints could be related to the trial, but complaining about night flights, this trial was not related to night flights. That is to come later in the year. But general questions seeking information about the trial, fair enough. And some people saying the relief, they sort of had a negative response to it. Others were positive. People in non-relief areas, there was a lot of negative pushback on the weekends that they were in a non-relief area, and a little bit of positive feedback when people were in a non-relief area, which is interesting given that that's the weekend they're supposed to get more noise, but we need to look in and see which weekends that were, where the feedback came from, and then sort of non-relief area, positive feedback. Oh, sorry, that was neutral and positive. I'm misreading that. So Now that the test is complete, the next step is to do a wider consultation or wider survey. There was some work done beforehand. Now, over the next 2 weeks, starting next week, there will be a final survey. It is set questions. It's available online at the web address there. And not only is it available for anyone to self-select and go and fill in the questionnaire, the airport will be organising robocalls to approximately 163,000 homes, focused in on the areas that were targeted for relief. And if somebody isn't in, a voicemail will be left for them, telling them that they can have an opportunity to provide the answers through the online survey form. And that hopefully we'll get a reasonable response to the surveys, and that data will then feed into the analysis over the next couple of months. As well, to promote this, there will be emails to elected officials so that they can then pass that information on to their constituents so as to promote the survey. There will be emails to residents that have provided feedback during the testing. The airport issues a monthly checking in newsletter that goes out to about 18,000 email addresses. It will be promoted via that, and there will also be the use of social media to promote the fact that the survey is online. So hopefully that is enough promotion to make people aware that there is an opportunity to provide feedback, and I'm hoping that we get a good number of responses from across the area, because that will allow us, rather than the 200 during the trial, that's a very small sample to build any knowledge on. If we can get into a few thousand responses from residents across the area, that gives a much more solid base on which to take decisions in the future and to look at the feedback. Okay, so the operational performance. Back during the consultation, I showed and explained this diagram, and that one is online. So just to recap, the numbers inside the grey open sort of non-shaded arrows is what the actual operation was in 2015. So 36% of the summer weekend arrivals and departures, departures going that way in this case, and arrivals coming in that way, 36% of the traffic flew over this quadrant of communities. We then looked at the idea of alternating the traffic and tried to project what that 2015 traffic would become under a runway alternation. And in this area, we predicted that it would drop to 20%, yet over the other side, 11% could become 27%. And this was often one of the issues during the consultation that was questioned quite a lot. And it is because normally, or in the past, there hasn't been management of the use of the runways in the same way. The minute you start to manage and have preference runways and direct Nav Canada to say, please try and use these runways when it is safe to do so, you're managing the traffic, and hence there is a more balanced distribution of the traffic. That is what's causing the big change in percentages. So if that's what we had seen and what we projected, what's the 8 weeks of testing done? So I've taken the 8 weekends prior to the test, and the first test weekend was the end of July, so the 8 weekends prior to that go through July, June and back into May, and then the last 8 weekends being the test weekends. And we see that the 8 weekends prior, the numbers and the pattern of traffic is very, very similar to what 2015 general summer weekend operation in the 8 weeks before the trial started is the same as most summer traffic, based on the fact that that mirrored what was happening in 2015. So we know that the 8 weekends before is normal operation for weekends, so is a valid baseline to work from. Then in the bluey sort of solid coloured arrows is the way the traffic has distributed over the past 8 weekends. And whilst we see that the traffic in this area has dropped, it hasn't dropped by as much as necessarily was predicted. And inversely, over the other side, the growth in traffic hasn't been as much as expected. On the 2406 runways, it very much matches what was projected. So this is an area where, whilst the figures are there, I can't explain why at this stage. I've just done the analysis of how many movements were in which area. And the work going forwards is to look at, can we explain why we're not seeing quite what we predicted? And can we learn from that? And is there a way to move the whole topic forwards? Looking at the data in another way, because the last one just showed the total traffic in any area, this one, and again, these 4 drawings were used during the consultation, but we didn't have percentages by them. So the percentages by them are, again, what has happened in the past 8 weekends. So 46% of westerly departures on the Group A weekends have departed up there, and 19% of arrivals have come in there. So if you add up the 4 blue percentages, that will be 100% of the departures that happened on the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th and the 7th weekend of the test. And on the 2nd, 4th, 6th and 8th weekend, the traffic is displayed in the bottom one. And this is to get an idea of the relief weekends and non-relief weekends. The fact it alternates every weekend is an alternation from the previous one. Totaling that up, over here we see that on a Group A weekend, if you take 36 and 38, and if my maths is working this evening, that's 74%. So 74% of the traffic on a Group A weekend was doing what we wanted it to do to provide relief. But if 74% was matching the concept, that means 26% wasn't matching the concept. Not that we expected the concept, the proposal, to be 100% successful, but it's interesting to see the Group B weekends, slightly lower, or lower performance. It totals 60% following the proposed operating method. And again, for now, I can tell you it's lower, it's 14% lower. I can't tell you why. We haven't done that level of analysis. So hence, these are the preliminary results. We're only 4 days after the trial ended. So trying to get a picture of what it is over the whole 8 weekends is quite difficult. There's a lot of traffic there, different directions, lots of influencing factors. But I'm going to build up a picture here which hopefully takes it away from numbers and gives something quite visual that you can start to see that there's been some good performance, some lower performance, and where that falls in the day. So bear with me as we build this up. The first weekend, back at the end of July, apparently you had, particularly on the Saturday, there were quite a few thunderstorms around. I wasn't here, and weather has a major impact on how the controllers can use the runways. Even if the thunderstorm isn't directly over the airport, the fact it's in the area will change the operation. And therefore, Saturday, we know there was a lot of weather going on in there. Quite how much weather there was on the Sunday, we need to go back and analyse that, but we've got those records. I ought to just say, the darker the colour, the higher the level of compliance with the concept. Not compliance in a regulatory or safety aspect. This is just what percentage of traffic was using the runways we wanted to be used on that weekend. So the darker the colour, the better to some extent. And I've put a key down here as to white means there was 0 compliance, and the dark colour 100%, just to give you a way of trying to gauge what it means. And the time period across the top here stems from 6:30 at the start right the way through until midnight, which is the operational day outside of the night preference runway period. So adding the second weekend, so an even weekend, the Group B weekend, again, you can see that there's quite a lot of light colour in here as well as dark. But one bit that stands out to me is the evening. The first weekend, nice and dark. The second weekend, it's virtually white. And I've said it a couple of times already. I can't tell you why at this stage, but that's the sort of questions that we've now got to look at and try and understand why, working with Nav Canada, working with the airport, working with the airlines, to dig in and see, is there something about the even weekend operation that is going to cause that regularly? Or is it an anomaly? Is it something we can do to address that and get an even weekend to match that first weekend? But bear in mind, we're only looking at 2 weekends here out of 8, and 8 is still a tiny survey period, as I said at the beginning, but it's useful just to test and to learn from. Layer in a few more weekends, and you can now start to see a colour pattern forming here. There tends to be a stronger use of the concept first thing in the morning. Then you seem to go through a period 8 o'clock through to about 9:30, when performance tends to be lower. Not every day, but just as a general pattern. Then there's a block from 9:30ish through to about 1:30, where performance is stronger. Then the afternoon tends to be a lower level of compliance. We always knew that Sunday afternoon was going to be a challenge. The traffic on a Sunday afternoon really starts to build in numbers, and even before we were doing this test, the controllers often used a dual runway or a triple runway operation on a Sunday afternoon, which wouldn't fit with the alternating plan. But the fact that Saturday is showing a similar level of compliance means we now need to go and look at, has Saturday traffic built to be similar to Sunday afternoon traffic? It's easy enough to look at, as well as looking at the weather and any other operational impacts on that. Thank you, Robin. I know what's coming. And again, the evenings, pretty good solid performance in that late evening from about 9:30 through until midnight. If I put in the rest of the weekends, again, the general pattern still stands. There are set periods you can start to see that show strong performance and other periods with a lower performance. The area that I pointed out here on the first Group B even weekend reoccurs on another even weekend, Group B weekend, but it didn't occur there. And it's then occurred on last Sunday, but it didn't occur on the Saturday. It shows it can work, it can get good performance, but it's not consistent. Why? That's what we now need to go on to do and try and see. But just looking at this, that period there looks like it can consistently deliver relief. That's not as long as maybe we had originally hoped for, and maybe we can change it and extend it, but through the learning from this. But one of the things from the survey will be is when people did get relief, was it valuable to them? And equally, on the non-relief weekends, did that period where they were receiving more normal traffic, was the disbenefit too much to outweigh the opposite weekend when they would have got some benefit? So even though it may not be through the whole day, relief for 3 or 4 hours could be valuable to people. But that's where the survey, we've got to get that feedback from the people who are actually underneath the key respite areas. Turn that colour chart into some numbers, because some people like numbers. At the moment, these are fairly by eye, my estimate of where the blocks of colours match up. So the time bands there, and within those, across all 8 weekends, that first morning bit, about an 82% level of compliance with the plan. That's good. Then, as we saw, it drops off to 69. That mid-morning to early part of the afternoon, 90% compliance. So again, there's a solid number of hours there that you can get some good relief in. Then the afternoon until mid-evening, quite low performance. That's that really white period, or pale blue period we were seeing. And then the performance grows again into that late evening. And if we just go back, some of those late evenings are really good, and then there are those 3 very pale ones that is dragging that down. So if I was to break it by individual weekends, we're going to be seeing 90+% compliance in these ones, but something probably less than 10% in those ones. So this is where, do you look at it as all the weekends, individual weekends, segments of hours? We've got to try and do that. And then I've broken the same time bands across the 8 weekends. So as you can start to see the numbers that match back to the colour diagram before. And these slides will be available online after this meeting. And there is 100% in there. In the 8 until 9:30 in the morning, on the 8th and 9th of September, there was 100% achievement in that period. But equally, there are some low ones in here at 51% at points. I think I've laboured the point about good and poor performance and understanding it enough. One of the other bits that's come back in the feedbacks is there are bits in there where people are saying, I've noticed a difference outside of the area where the relief or non-relief is supposed to be happening. It's what I could call potential unintended impacts. We wouldn't expect an impact on the downwind, i.e. the segment that runs parallel to the airport, the south downwind or north downwind, when we're trying to change the operation in the straight in and straight out areas. This is not the area where this trial is impacting. But there have been a number of bits raised, and we will look at them. The one we've looked at so far is the vertical element of use on the downwind. We've looked at all 4, the sort of quadrants for the downwind, and 2 virtual gates. I imagine a gate in space or a window in space, and we've counted the aircraft going through that and the altitude they are at. And from that, this is only showing the altitude element, and the blue is the baseline, the black is the test period, and you've got percentage of aircraft which read across to this axis in the columns. In each, these are 500-foot altitude bands, and then the line gives a cumulative of the traffic, which is read against the other vertical axis, and you can just see that the blue and the black cumulative line there are near enough on top of each other's, and the bars match very well. And likewise for the next gate, so this would be higher traffic, hence the chunk of traffic is in the 6,500 foot, because the traffic coming here is coming this way, descending to turn and come back into the airport. So the second gate, the traffic is lower, around the 4,500 foot. And again, the bars are all very similar, and the cumulative lines are similar. So from this, at this stage, I would say the trial over these 8 weekends has not changed the vertical profile on this particular downwind. And as I've said, we will look at all 4. I've got one other one here prepared this evening, which is the southeast downwind. And again, the data doesn't suggest any difference in the vertical element. This isn't saying whether there's been a difference in the number of traffic or the speed or anything else along there. It's just saying, is the traffic lower during the 8 test weekends compared to the 8 weekends before? And my conclusion is no. I wouldn't expect it to be, but the data supports the fact that the vertical element hasn't changed. So, what next? You've probably gathered, because I've said it quite a few times, we've got more detailed investigations to do. Listed here some of the things we will be looking at. Is the demand in the 8 test weekends, or was the demand in the 8 test weekends, greater than some of the capacities that were available at the time based on weather and other things going on around the airport, compared to our forecasts that we did beforehand? Weather is a key one here, but is there something about the mix of airlines, mix of aircraft sizes, types in any of these periods that is causing lower performance? Off-slot operations or on-time performance by airlines. It's one thing to predict everything working on time, but no airport achieves aircraft operating to schedule. They all shift around a bit. Is there bunching of traffic at certain times a day that is more than at other times a day? We'll look into it, and as I said, we'll work with Nav Canada, because the controllers are one of the key influences in the day-to-day operation, obviously, and the airlines to try and unpick why we've seen different performance. Our analysis will also look at some of the noise monitor data that Colin was presenting about that is collected. So we will use data from a number of the noise monitors to look and see, have there been more noise events during the trial versus before the trial? Are they louder or quieter than previously? Usage of the downwinds, I've looked at the vertical profile, but is there any other change in how the downwinds have been used during this? And also looking at the descent profiles. The previous couple of slides showed 2 gates. That is 2 tiny points of the whole of the descent profile. So we'll have a look using the data coming out of the noise and track keeping system that can build that vertical profile to look at the whole of the descent profile and see if anything changed with how aircraft were descending. Then, as I mentioned earlier, there is a final survey. It's available online. It is up there from the 24th of September, i.e. Monday, and that will run through until the 9th of October. The telephone calls will be going out, all the publicity through the elected officials, email channels, social media to alert people to this. If you've got a means to communicate that onwards, please do so. And then the aim that we're working for is to report back in December, which gives us a couple of months to do that detailed analysis and come back to this group with a final presentation and a written report based on all of the analysis we've done. We'll try and keep the report at an easy to understand level, and all the data and analysis will be buried in appendices so as to try and not drown people in statistics and actually put some meaning around it and pull out the key messages. Okay.
Representing NAV Canada, that was Michelle Bishop. I just want to update you. Michelle has accepted a very exciting opportunity at CANSA, which is the Civil Air Navigation Services Organization. So we're really happy for her. It's an exciting role that's right up her alley in terms of skill sets. I have been working with Michelle for many years. I have been on her team, so there should be a fair amount of continuity with me becoming representing NAV Canada at CENAC. And also just want to let you know that Michelle is available to us from a historical perspective and memory, so we'll be able to access that knowledge as well. So I just want to update that if you were expecting to see somebody else. The other items I want to update on were related to the 6 ideas. Obviously, there's a significant consultation that was taken in the spring. What we've seen here is an update on one of the ideas. There are 4 ideas that were NAV Canada's responsibility, or NAV Canada was proposing. Idea 3 was implemented a while back. It was an initiative that did not require consultation. The other 3 did, so I'll give you an update on those 3. The first idea number 1, which looks at new nighttime procedures for approaches for aircraft arriving at night. What we're looking at here is using technology to better overfly non-residential areas using green spaces, commercial spaces, and overfly fewer people at night when aircraft can be more noticeable, as Mr. Novak explained. So that we are proceeding on course. Our commitment following consultation would be that we'd implement in November 2018. We are on course with that. We've done our controller training. We flight checked the new procedures. They're good to go, and they will be published shortly. So we are on track for those new procedures. Idea number 2, we're looking at new nighttime departure procedures, so targeting a similar time period, but affecting aircraft that depart at night. Same methodology in terms of trying to avoid residentially populated areas. These are also proceeding on track. These will be implemented in November as well. It's a little more, I guess, more of a conventional solution. These aren't procedures that get published. They're actually controller procedures where they will ensure aircraft stay on a certain course that avoids residential areas as much as possible on departure. So that's on track. Idea number 4, this idea was increasing use of continuous descent operations. What we mean by that is today often controllers, as they sequence aircraft to the airport, they have to level the aircraft off on their way down, and that low altitude leveling, obviously they need to increase thrust. It's on the downwind, it's noticeable. So what we've done with this initiative is try to create a procedure that allows us to lever the computers on an airplane so that it can fly a continuous descent profile. And so that means instead of leveling off, the computer says, okay, I need to be at this waypoint at this altitude. It descends on a continuous descent rate. So that means less engine thrust, and often means for some segments of the flight, they'll be much higher. So that's obviously a benefit. Some locations we looked at, we're expecting aircraft to be as much as 1,500 feet higher, approximately. So that I should specify those procedures will still be applied tactically. It's traffic permitting. Sometimes the controllers will still need the existing structure, but when possible, as much as possible, they'll try to use these new continuous descent profiles, which will have some benefits for communities. That initiative is a little more complex in implementation. We are proceeding on track as we had reported through the public engagement report following consultation. We are looking at implementing in early 2019 following controller training and the publication process. So those are the updates on the 6 initiatives. Should I mention the INMB as well, or at this stage?
Sure, just to give context how it started, sure.
Okay, sure. So one of the recommendations out of the HELOS report is the establishment of an industry noise management board. This is a board that brings together all technical experts from the airlines, from Transport Canada, from NAV Canada, from the airport, very much operationally focused people to look at opportunities to change operating procedures so that they can be more noise sensitive. A couple of the near-term deliverables that the deadlines are approaching are 2 key initiatives. One is reporting on continuous descent operations. So I mentioned initiative 4 will allow for more continuous descent operations. Well, we need to report on that. So we are developing a framework and the tools to do that. The other big item that we're looking at is actually a code of conduct for pilots and controllers. It's really an education piece for operational people, frontline operations people, to ensure that they are aware of opportunities to conduct their operations in a sensitive manner. So that's something that's on the way as well. Both of those items are targeted for the end of 2018.
Great. So we have, over to you, time for comments, questions, feedback. We do have some online, so I'm going to go there. A couple of ground rules. Let's have one person has the floor, so the person with the microphone has the floor. Please wait for the response. Don't interrupt the response, so we can have a civil dialogue. And we'll go to the people on live stream now. They have a couple of questions. So let's start with one question. We'll go back and forth.
Thank you, Jim. We have a question from Marie Santo. It's regarding the weekend runway alternation program. Why were my non-relief weekends, maybe we'll put up the slide, Group A Vaughan, quiet, but much more traffic and noise during specific weekdays?
The weekdays, there was no change to the weekday operation. This was purely focused at the weekends, so I can't comment as to what has gone on Monday to Friday through this period. As I've sort of said through the presentation, we have seen mixed performance at different times a day, but there was nothing changed Monday to Friday, so there shouldn't have been any change in that traffic as a result of this trial. That doesn't mean to say there wasn't, it's just this was only focused on Saturdays and Sundays.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Questions in the room? So there's one there, there's a bunch, so let's come up to this. You've already had one question, so I'll go to a new person. Let's go to the back there, and we'll come back to you. Please introduce yourself.
I just partially addressed earlier, but is there a correspondence between the number of complaints and the number of noise monitoring devices being installed?
Ask Cynthia to pick that up.
Hi. So when we conducted the noise monitoring terminal review in 2015, the main things we looked at were traffic levels, altitudes, noise levels. The only part that complaints, the only role they played where it was a factor when we were comparing the different potential sites and the number of people that had submitted complaints, not the number of complaints.
If the number of people is greater, it would make sense that the number of complaints would be greater too. So I noticed in North Oakville, there's only one monitoring device I think I saw, and yet it's second in the number of complaints. So I'm just wondering if there is going to be some kind of action plan to address that.
To address a second noise monitoring terminal. The one that's in Oakville was put in a place that was the most intense as far as the flight path, the intensity, the concentration, and the noise. So
it was 2 years ago.
Yes.
Since then, there's probably been 50,000 more people moved in north of Oakville. Maybe I'm exaggerating. So would there be a corresponding implementation of noise monitoring devices to address that?
There's no plans at this time, no.
Ask that?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question up here. Let's come up here to the representative from Tang, and then we'll go back to you. But we do all go back to the folks online.
Sandy Best, Tang, and also High Park. I have two questions. The first question is, will people outside of the relief area be surveyed as much as those in the relief area? Because I think you might find that there are considerable numbers of complaints. I'm outside the relief area, and Nick, at the time when this was suggested, I asked for assurances that on those heavily used routes that there would be no impact. And in fact, it's not what certainly I'm hearing. And that may be all subjective. I don't know, I guess, when I see your research. But I would like to make sure that no decisions are made without those people along the routes, not necessarily in the designated relief areas, are surveyed as much as those relief areas.
As I understand it, the robocalls are going to target the relief areas, but the ability for anyone to respond to the survey is equally open to all areas, all residents of the Greater Toronto Area. It is just the robocalls that are going to focus in on the relief areas, as I believe they did prior to the trial, to alert people to this 8-week cane period.
Because I know, for instance, the first weekend was a nightmare from my area. It just was a complete nightmare, which sort of begs the question, if there are weather conditions, why wasn't it canceled that weekend? But that's another issue, right? And there are many other issues, I think, that have to be taken in consideration. For instance, if you're using a certain runway that sees a lot of early turns, clearly that is going to be a massive issue for people. My other question is around the noise monitors, and you may be able to answer this as well. I thought I heard in the presentation that no noise monitors, or very few, were placed close to apartment buildings because of the ricochet effect and the intensification of the noise. But in fact, that's exactly where maybe some should be placed, because single-family homes are there, so they would have a much more intense noise experience than if they were in a development that had no high-rises.
When a noise monitoring terminal is installed, the area that it covers is quite large. When we say we're not going to put it next to an apartment building, we mean we're not going to put it within 30 to 50 meters from an apartment building, because we don't want the reflection to impact that. Yet when we say we're not going to be within 30 to 50 meters, the breadth of where the terminal is can cover more than a kilometer.
But with low-rise developments beside them. And so that would encompass a large portion of where that flight path goes.
Yeah, and I'm not disputing that. All I'm saying is we locate them where we're going to get the best quality of data that's not going to be impacted from a physical perspective of either absorption or reflection. We want something that's going to be as accurate as possible.
But I think not really getting an accurate, I'll just give an example just so you could, because you're the expert, so, and I explain this to other people, so if I have your information, it's much better for me. For instance, where the portable noise monitor was placed originally was at the corner of Keele and Bloor, where there's tons of ambient noise, so therefore it's completely false readings. Whereas up the hill, which is much higher ground, lots of low-rise development, single-family homes, and a significant number of apartment buildings. That's noise central. And so if you're not getting the readings there, you're not getting it.
Yeah, it's difficult sometimes to actually place the temporary monitors, the portable monitors, because we have to get permission from the residences, and we were having a difficult time in certain areas getting those permissions. So sometimes they're not in the temporary ones in the most ideal, but what we do is when we look at that data, we also look at the ambient levels. We also look at the high other sources of noise. I can say that when I was doing the temporary monitoring, every single event, whether we monitored it for 3 days or for 3 weeks, we listened to every single event. So if it was a car going by because we were a little close to the roadway, that was so everything that was included in the data was identified as being an aircraft.
Of the noise, then the folks in that area are getting an intense noise experience, and that's an issue, right? But
the intent isn't to be able to evaluate every single person in the population is going to experience. The intent is to determine what the community impacts are going to be. But having said that, when we have that data, an acoustician can take that data and we could predict or model what the impact would be for that person in that apartment building. That's relatively easy for us to do. Yeah, well, I was just using that as an example.
Point taken. So we're going to go to the folks who are live streaming, so we're going to be equal back and forth here. There's 28 people online, so let's have a question from the online group.
Thank you again, Jim. So we have another question from resident Lily McKenzie, asking why the north-south runways aren't used or weren't used when the prevalent winds are north-south during low traffic times.
I can certainly answer that. Can you say the question one more time for me, please, Kathy?
Sure, no problem. Why aren't north-south runways used when the prevalent winds are north-south during low traffic times?
During low traffic times. So everybody hear me in the back?
Yes, it's on.
We use the east-west runways predominantly because they deliver the best operational capacity for the airport, the efficiency. If we have the ability to stay east-west, we traditionally stay east-west. We do have our preferential runway system for nighttime usage that does define some usage of the north-south runways, but typically we will only use the north-south runways if the weather drives us to the north-south runways. The weather requires it.
Great, thank you.
They don't deliver the same capacity as the east-west runways. Our current operational protocols are to stay east-west, weather permitting. That's the way we operate our runways today. If the weather permits us to use the east-west runways, we stay on the east-west runways. I think one of the other things that we have to consider too, that the level of traffic that we do have right now doesn't normally permit the use of the north-south runways because of the capacity that they deliver. So the number of flights we have every hour exceeds what the north-south runways can traditionally do. There's only a few hours of the day that would permit the use of the north-south runways.
But you're actually saying
Sure. Nick, maybe you could address that just originally on a capacity level, why the north-south runways weren't, for example, part of the runway alternation program, which I think underscores that the capacity is such that it's hard to use those consistently.
Yeah,
our original analysis, we did look at alternating in all four directions. We found that the north-south couldn't be delivered with anything like the predicted level that we were seeing east-west. As I said, the level that we've seen east-west at times is lower than we had predicted, and we're going to investigate why. The other challenge with going to the north-south, if for a short period, it takes air traffic control at least an hour of planning, possibly more, to swap the traffic in the air from there to there. It sounds easy, but it's not. So therefore, to move to the north-south runways for a short period of time, it takes a lot of extra effort and will put aircraft in unusual places, causing noise as well. That is one of the reasons that, as well, where if the weather is for a short period, potentially there isn't the time to swap to the north-south, but predominantly it was the fact that in the analysis we were doing before the trial, we couldn't see a consistent pattern to use the north-south runways, and the predominant wind direction at Toronto is an east-west wind, which drives the east-west operation, which is why that is where the bulk of the operation has grown since this was a small airfield into a large airfield, because it's been built around the wind direction and the bulk of the operation.
Okay, I'd appreciate if you could put up your hand and have the wait for the microphone come to you. So let's go over to this side. We haven't been to this side very much, so let's go to this side.
Sure.
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm no urban planning expert here, but why don't the planes fly over areas that are already loud, like highways?
Sure, there's a few reasons for that. It'd be great if we could just have aircraft fly in a very random manner, but what happens is to manage aircraft arriving to the airport, we do need structure. Air traffic controllers require predictability. There are a lot of aircraft converging at the airport at the same time. There's not just one plane in the sky where we can direct along a highway. So we actually have to have a structure that allows us to predict and allows the controller to sequence the aircraft to the runway. So it's fundamentally a safety issue to be able to do that. The other aspect is also the navigation technology on board an aircraft. They do fly towards waypoints, so that's why you do see some repetition, is that the computer on board uses technology that uses waypoints, and they don't follow a roadway, for instance.
Follow-up question to that? You're okay. Okay, let's go back to the back, and then we'll come up to the front here again. So let's go back to the back there. There's a gentleman at the back there with his hand up. And we'll come up to you. Yeah, we'll move through the room. We've still got time, so I'll endeavor to get to as many of your questions as possible.
I'm Sean Hodges, and I live on the west end, Mississauga. My question is with regard to this runway alternation program. Is this a policy decision that's been made that it's not changeable and all you're doing is really measuring your success? Or is there a possibility that this program disappears entirely?
Yes, at this stage, we don't know enough to decide either way whether this is worthwhile pursuing any further, whether we can learn lessons from this and do another trial to get more results and more information, or whether the analysis we do over the next couple of months will say there is not enough benefit out of this, there's not support, and therefore it's not going to be taken forward. At this point, we don't know.
Sorry, I just had a follow-up question. The reason why I asked that is when I was purchasing our property 15 years ago, I purposely avoided areas that had massive signs that said airport noise warning and purchased in an area that didn't. And now based on this, it does. So it's impacting me after the fact. So by moving and providing relief to people who were in the previous flight path, you're now impacting me, who made a purposeful decision in my property purchase to avoid that area, and sort of changing the variables after the fact.
In the weekend trial, there has been no change to flight path. The aircraft are following the tracks that they always have.
Excuse me.
The reason why I ask is on one of your graphs.
Excuse me.
This is the first time that anything about aircraft being in different places during the test period has been raised with myself.
Show us a chart that shows otherwise.
Yeah, okay. Okay, if that is a question that you want answered, then we will take that and look at it. But at the moment, there were no new flight paths implemented to run this trial. Therefore, the aircraft will follow the flight paths that have been there since 2012.
So the room feels differently, they'll take that away.
I was going to say, as I alluded to in one of the slides, the weekends does cause a redistribution of traffic from one end to the other side because we are managing which runways are being used on which days. They're not on new flight paths, but the quantity of traffic in an area may go up or may go down. It's not a change of routing that the aircraft is following.
No, but that's exactly what I'm talking about. So before, one of your flights, or one of your slides said, the area that I live in, flights came over 12% of the time. Yeah, it's this one. Now, so previously it was 12%, and now it's 22%. So
let's have one conversation,
that's
please.
My question.
Yep.
So I understand you're not introducing new flight paths. You're redistributing it so that, you know, ones where traditionally there was more volume are getting less volume, and ones where there traditionally was less volume getting more. So
yeah. That is one of the disbenefits with having a program to try and provide relief on alternating weekends, and that was brought up during the consultation, and that is one of the things that the airport has got to balance in deciding, based on the feedback it receives, is this program worthwhile giving people the benefit of relief that's hopefully predictable every other weekend, but it does have a downside, which we did highlight, is this redistribution of traffic. I totally understand that if you live in that quarter, then yes, you're not going to want to see increased traffic, but equally, there may be people there who want the respite in alternate weekends to know there will be some weekends in the summer when noise will be much less. It's a balanced judgment, and each of us has different views.
I understand. That's why I asked whether or not it was a policy decision, and whether you were just monitoring it, or whether or not our feedback will actually have an impact.
Absolutely. So just to reiterate, no decision has been made. This was a test to begin to understand how this changed and how it was experienced, and the community feedback will be a really critical piece of understanding how to go forward. And generally, as Nick noted, we had about 150 people respond so far, but what you're saying is basically echoing what we heard writ large, that the change in operation on the non-relief weekends doesn't seem to be worth the benefit of the relief weekends.
Okay, there's one back here, and then I want you to come up to the front. So we've been waiting to find for a little bit. So let's go to that one, and then we'll come back up to the front. Yeah. And let's have one conversation, please. We are recording this. This will go online, and for those people at home, it's hard to hear if there's a number of conversations going on. So let's have one conversation. The person with the microphone has the floor.
Sorry, so I'm Maya again, and like I said, it's my first meeting, so I'm not sure if you guys have covered this, and I totally agree with everybody, but I'm more concerned about how low these airplanes are now flying. I have never seen them so low, and it started happening about 2 years ago, and I have tons of pictures on my phone. I'm happy to show you later.
Where do you live?
Where do you live? I am south of Bristol, so I'm very close to Eglinton, and they've never gone that far south. So I did a little research, and I looked up the International Civil Aviation Organization, and what these low air planes are emitting are, as for example, ozone, which affects our lung function. They cause pulmonary inflammations, lung structure damage, carbon monoxide, cardiovascular effects, nitrogen oxides, lung irritation, respiratory infections. Then there's particulate matter, which causes premature mortality due to cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. Then there are volatile organic compounds, VOCs, which cause eye and respiratory tract irritation, headaches, dizziness, visual disorders, and I'm pretty sure they all cause cancer too. I've also done some research also on the same website, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and apparently the average aircraft should be able to reach 10,000 feet in 4 minutes. And I've noticed that, the airplanes near my area, they're probably maybe at 1,000 feet when they pass me on departure. And I watch WebTrack. I also have a problem with WebTrack. It's not really recording them where they actually are. However, when you see the plane approach the lake, in no time, they go from apparently 3,000 to like 14,000 feet because they're approaching the US. It seems like the US has stricter regulations about how low you can fly an airplane in a residential area. So I have a problem with that, and I'd like to know why are airplanes flying so low for such a long time? I don't understand why they're still low in Oakville. I mean, that is absolutely crazy. That's like 30, 40, 60 kilometers.
Let's have the response.
Sorry, so my real question is, why are they flying so low for such a long time? And what are the Canadian regulations for airplanes flying over residential areas? Are there absolutely no regulations?
Jonathan and
Canada.
So there was a couple of components to that question in terms of a climb. There are procedures in terms of aircraft climbing out from the airport that are climbed to 3,000 feet, usually before proceeding on course. Sometimes they might be required to stay level after hitting a certain altitude because there's an arrival over it, so they're flying under the arrival. That could be one of the reasons why they have to level off. Generally, we want to get aircraft to cruise altitude as quickly as possible, so we're not going to keep them lower at a level flight over residential areas if we don't have to. The other part of the question was regarding regulation. The main mechanism there relates to noise exposure forecasts and zoning. So Transport Canada has some guidance around cumulative noise exposure and how land can be zoned around an airport, and provides recommendations about how development should happen in relation to that exposure.
That's what you're saying. Just guidelines, no regulations. So we as human beings are not protected at all. It's all about the airplanes
let's have Transport Canada respond to that.
And the money, yes.
Let's have Transport Canada respond to that.
Yeah, no, I'm with Transport Canada. We do have regulations for overflights of people in buildings, minimum altitudes, and those only vary when the aircraft is taken off and landing. Obviously, it needs to come closer to the ground for takeoff and/or landing. But en route flights have minimum regulations, and I'm pretty certain that they are commensurate with the FAA as well.
Okay,
and
let's,
sorry, Jim, can I just touch upon one final, there's a lot to unpack in that question, one final thing about the air quality. I just wanted to note that the GTAA does regularly undertake an air quality study to understand the air quality in and around the airport, and based on our operational impact, and as well as a human health assessment. Our last one we conducted in 2014, I think, and all of the materials are available online, and we did work with the community as well as the boards of health and the medical officers of health of the communities around the airport on that study and on the findings of that study. So that's all available on our website, and generally found that there, in the areas where the particulate matter would fall, there is actually low to no risk to adults in the community living around the airport. So that's all available online.
Okay.
Sure, and we do regularly update it on usually about every 10 years, but we are very open to exploring whether we need to do that more often based on our operational changes.
Well, gentlemen at the back, and then we're going to come up to the front because we've missed this front.
I live in Etobicoke, and I found this table.
We're coming.
About complaints by federal riding. And my neighborhood, Etobicoke, has the largest number of complaints, at about 30,000. And the number of individuals is about 250. So what I see, Etobicoke is affected significantly by the noise produced by the planes. I found that the last 3-4 months, the number of planes which are flying above my house, not my neighborhood, my house, which is on Allen Hart Drive, increased exponentially. And I totally agree with you. I understood that you live in Oakville, right?
Oh, no.
No? Okay, so Etobicoke, the altitude, it's above my head. Guys, it's about safety of this city. Think about, okay, you have your guidance. This is great. But above the head. So I have two questions. Number one, for our researchers, for research group, sorry, I don't remember your name. Based on these numbers from this table, when you do your research, do you take into consideration the neighborhoods with the largest number of complaints? How you select your target group? And for airport authority, we are all suffering here. So I understand that, to be fair, you can alternate somehow the trajectories or the paths of the planes. So my question is, are you doing this, or you just have east, west, north, south?
Flight paths. Okay. Sorry.
I was going to say, you referenced a table of complaints there. I think that is the one that Cynthia...
Yeah, our noise, it's our noise report.
That's not my work at this. That would, Cynthia as the noise management office would be.
So let's
Jonathan, I think we'll address the first part.
Are you asking if they're alternating all the way around? Yes. So they're asking if they're alternating all the way around. For noise.
I can...
Again, about the altitude of the place, please.
And altitude.
What is your attitude about this low altitude of planes about which are flying above our city?
So depending on your specific area, it might impact what you observe, but what I can say, looking at the different flight paths, one thing that with current technology, with program flight paths on an airplane, the technology isn't in place today to allow for multiple programmed routes like parallel downwind legs. Downwind leg is when they're flying before turning towards the airport. However, when you look at some of the proposals through ideas 1 and 4 specifically, what we've done is we've used technology. I mean, these are coming into place later this year. It doesn't affect all the aircraft. It's a subset, but we are looking at opportunities when it's quieter to free ourselves from the structure, the requirement to have a structure to manage all the traffic. We've looked at opportunities to use more flexible routing, and that's what the proposals Idea 1 and 4 allowed us to do. They allow us to, Idea 1 is actually, it doesn't use a downwind leg structure, which is what you're likely referring to in Etobicoke. It allows us to cut right over Lake Ontario. Idea 4 allows us to use continuous descent. Some aircraft will be at the same location, but on continuous descent profile. But what it also does, it does actually allow more opportunities to cut straight across to join what's called the base leg before turning towards the airport. So there are some things that where we can, traffic permitting, we are trying to find opportunities to do that. But overall, when you look at the structure, that frequency or the repetition, which is obviously a source for concern if you're under one of these downwind legs, that structure is necessary to manage the capacity and the demand, the predictability. Because in air traffic control, with a lot of aircraft arriving, there's aircraft arriving from both sides of the airport. So you might be observing them on one side. There's the other side that can observe them as well, and they're on this what are called downwind legs. We need those to symmetrical so the controller can predict their arrivals and sequence them safely. In terms of altitude, there's an aspect, a question there about altitude. Obviously, to what Clifford was saying, obviously we're descending to land, so often they're getting lower. Sometimes we do have to level them off because we don't know, it might get a little technical here, but we don't know exactly when we'll be able to turn them to land. So we level them off, and the control will turn them in relationship to the aircraft on the other side. So they have two planes coming. I'm doing a bit of an interpretation.
I'm talking about planes which are taking off.
Oh, taking off, sorry.
Yeah, only taking off. In my case, only taking off.
But you're close to it.
Okay, so takeoffs. Yeah, they're just they're taking off. They're climbing at a rate to proceed on course. Obviously, they're going from zero AGL and climb. We want to get them to altitude. Sometimes you have to level them off because there's an arrival overhead, but our goal is to get them climbing to cruise altitude as soon as possible. It's in our interest, it's in the airline's interest to do that, but unfortunately we are managing arrivals departures against those arrivals, and so sometimes we have to level them off when they're taking off. I think that's what we're referring to. Without seeing your exact location, that would be a general item.
Okay, let's go to this lady and then up to the front. Do you have any more online?
I do have one.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Julie. I live in Mississauga. I've been listening to what you're saying, and if I'm understanding this correctly, basically you're saying there's been no change. And I've lived in this area since 1999. And I can tell you in the last couple of years, if I sit outside in my backyard at a certain period of time and I'm on the phone, the person I'm talking to cannot hear me because of the noise of the planes. I did not have that in 1999 to about 2015. So I don't know what's changed, but something has changed that I cannot sit outside anymore.
In the garden anymore. Let's come to the front, Catherine. We have some people up front have been waiting. So.
Sure. So.
What's changed? Can anybody just...
So I would just add, there's been no operational or flight path change since 2015. I think it is in 2012. Certainly since 2015, but since the last one was in 2012. No.
Let's have just a second. We can't hear when 12 people are talking. Let's have one conversation, please.
Sure. No, it's certainly.
So if she's trying to respond to the question, please let her respond to the question. Can we have a response, please? Without interruption? Thanks. Go ahead.
Sure. No, of course. It's certainly a challenge. You know, the airport, the city around the airport is growing, the region is growing. The airport has a role to play as an economic driver for the region, and the airport is growing. And so certainly there is an increase in traffic there's an increase in the flights that you'll be seeing overhead. The airport is growing. So that is a piece, and we work very hard to balance the growth and identify what areas and ways that we can mitigate or minimize our impacts where we can, such as ideas like the runway alternation. Sure, on the weekends, on weekends, it did bring change to how the aircraft flew overhead, but it did also bring respite. So those are the types of tools that are available to us. Or as Jonathan mentioned, in low traffic periods, exploring flight paths that fly over fewer people. But yeah, it's certainly challenging. The airport is growing. We have really strong economic growth, and we're trying to figure out how to balance that. And that would be the most significant difference you would see year over year. Sure.
Okay. Can you wait?
Because of this. No, it's certainly.
So rather than heckling, you can put up your hand. Excuse me. Rather than heckling, you can put up your hand, and the microphone can come to you. Okay, so let's have a question from you then.
Please.
Here's the microphone. Wait for the microphone.
I'm loud enough.
It needs to just be heard online.
Okay. So where we live it was a very quiet area. We have been living there.
Where do you live?
Willowdale.
Okay.
We have been living there. My husband lived there 30 years. I've been living there 17 years, and was quiet, like a tom, quiet. And 2 months ago, it started like a. I don't have a similarity. This is terrible. It's very noisy, like the lady says. And I have a question. I have an answer for you. They are waiting. We get that this is the Alzheimer, and we forget about everything. That's it. That's the solution. They are lying. I'm so sorry. Don't take it personally. You are lying. It has been lots of change. 2 months ago. Now I can't go out to my garden anymore because, as the lady says, I can't hear and they can't hear me. It's a terrible place to live now. I'm thinking how I can sell my house. That's the question, but you don't have an answer for this question.
This lady here and then him.
For this?
No question. Go ahead.
I have an answer, or pardon me, I have a question, but I also have some information that I'd like to bring to your attention with regard to the survey that you've currently done and the robocalls that you're going to be sending out and the elected officials that you thought you'd be notifying. As of September the 7th, councillors in the City of Toronto are not allowed to use the resources of their office to contact constituents. They have to be in a neutral position because they are in an election cycle. So please check with the City of Toronto. Otherwise, you will be getting no information to anyone with regard to that. And my other question, and then I'll come back to others if there's time, but Colin, I want to ask you, I have been here since you initiated your sound reports and when you tabled them. I've referred to them often when I've been making presentations, and I'd like a little bit more information with regard to the new 9 terminals that you decided were at the highest LMAX levels. That you
Say that again.
The 9 terminals that you determined on your chart that you tabled in 2016. You did a chart with various different locations and what their scores and ratings were. You took the highest rating LMAX score, and those were designated as the new monitor, the new locations for the monitor. So when I see in my area that I'm at 83 LMAX, is that 83 decibels? I see by how you described the acoustics today that in fact it's the loudest noise occurrence in the area. But what does 83 mean?
All of the measurements are A-weighted levels, so that would be an A-weighted decibel level. Yes.
What does that mean?
Yeah, of course. And I've done presentations in the past that had explained some of this stuff. I'm trying to put it into perspective. Yeah.
We're all here and we all don't like noise, but at some point we have to understand the facts and the data. So when I hear 70, 70 is way better than my 83, but we're all not happy. But I want to know where I lie in terms of the spectrum of noise and decibel levels, and that's probably what others would like to know.
Actually, be a good presentation.
Because a max level could be just an instantaneous level. You could have a soundscape that is 55, and that's quite comfortable. 55 may be sitting in your living room with the TV down at a very low level or having a conversation with someone. That could be a 55. I could then clap my hands and we can get an L max of 85, but it happens just for a short period of time. So I think one of the descriptors that's a little bit better that we also included in that analysis was not just the max level, but also the difference between the max levels or even the LEQ levels during an event compared to the ambient level outside of that event. So that deviation or that delta. If we had an L max of, I think you said 82? 83, and the ambient level was very high, like 75, that L max would really not be having much of an impact because it's already very loud. However, if the background level were 55, that L max would have a significant impact. It would be quite startling, but it wouldn't be necessarily as sustained. So that's one of the reasons why I also like to look at these LEQs, because they're average levels over that period of time. So for example, if I have a 1-minute flight passover, it takes about a minute from the onset of when you start to hear it to the time that it starts to fade. If I had an LEQ of, say, 65, but the minute before and the minute after it was 45, I would say that was a significant impact. However, if it was 65 and immediately before and after it were 62, there's hardly any difference there. And to put decibels into perspective, someone else mentioned, it takes a difference of 3 decibels for someone to just barely notice that there's been a change. So if there's an increase of 1 or 2 decibels, you wouldn't even be able to hear that. 3 decibels, you'd start to say, I think it got louder, I think it got quieter. 5 decibels, I hear the difference. 10 decibels, it's now twice as loud. 20 decibels, 4 times as loud. Because when we're dealing with a logarithmic scale, it's not linear, it is exponential. So I understand that it can be very confusing, but what makes it even more confusing is when we mix L maxes and compare that to ambients that aren't max levels, they're steady state. So then it's a blip and it looks like that. Is that blip significant? From an impact perspective, it might be. but it may not be. So you have to look at a bigger picture. So just looking at some of the numbers without the context is confusing and doesn't necessarily give you the entire picture, but I'd be happy to sit down with you and look at the data and try my best to give you that perspective.
Would it be correct in saying this? When I gave you the number of 83 max and the LEQs and the ambient noise that you were speaking about, the fact that you chose my area for a permanent monitor would indicate that given all the information that had been combined, that it rated highest with regard to those that were being analyzed in its entirety?
I don't remember where it fell within that. We actually...
Well, it was number 1.
It could be. I don't remember. I know the area very well. I installed the monitor myself. It did score high, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there were 3 high scores, but you chose it for the noise monitor because it was the highest of the 3.
We actually looked at a couple of different locations in that area.
Yeah.
The reason why we only chose one was because they were so close to each other, and that was one of our criteria. We don't want to put, 2 monitors within a kilometer or whatever, because they're all going to measure approximately the same thing.
Thank you.
So I guess, it sounds like yours was at the max.
I think Colin, and it would be worthwhile to sort of think about a presentation where we sort of do an overlay quadrant of the kind of operations in a quadrant and then a reading from the NMTs. I think that would be a really valuable presentation. So we'll bring that forward for the next couple CENACs.
Colin's obviously a wealth of knowledge. So back here.
Hi, I'm Greg Hardy. I live south of runway 15 left. I have a question for Michael and for Jonathan. As you know, you have a preferred runway for overnight flights program in place. It's being changed now in November to departures using 33 right versus north-south runways. I asked this question back to Michael back last CENAC meeting. We have an issue with pilot requests that are using non-preferred runways for departures in the overnight hours. They typically come at 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's where the major disruption the people living south of the airport find. Jonathan, I'm asking you, because Michael, I did look through Transport Canada's fines and penalties against carriers and individual people, because you mentioned that if they're non-compliant, they would be written up and there should be a compliance issue with these pilots that are requesting non-preferred runways. There's no penalties whatsoever to anyone that's departing on the non-preferred runways. So Jonathan, I'm asking you, why does the air traffic controllers allow pilot requests to use non-preferred runways during off hours for those runways?
So I'd have to look into the specific instances to understand what was happening. There could be different factors. Obviously, the preferred runways are what controllers will try to stick to. There could have been a weather issue, a wind issue. I'm not sure what may have resulted in them ending up using a different runway. I'd have to look into the specifics.
We just know that historically it's random 2 or 3 flights every couple of nights. All traffic is east-west. These are just pilot requests because we called in to ask why the planes were taking off. We were told it's a pilot request. Okay. So the normal airflow is east-west like it should be, but these are just pilot requests that are deviating from the preferred runways.
I think I want to answer the very first question you asked about idea number 6 and the preferential runways, or the new proposed preferential runways. That is not going into play in November. That is something that we are still deciding on when that test would be undertaken to do that, but that is not happening in November. The new nighttime arrival and departure routes are happening in November, but the preferential runway system is not. We have not decided when we're going to conduct the test on the change.
Okay, we have one online, and then we'll go back to the room. So let's go here.
Thank you, Jim. We have a question from a Don Mills resident. I am from Don Mills Residents Association, and we have been experiencing low, loud, and frequent Pearson eastbound departures all summer in my neighborhood, located 30 kilometers from Pearson. Is it correct to say that Pearson departures are flying at a lower altitude during summer time?
The only subtlety that I could see there is that temperature. Aircraft climb better in cold weather. is because of air density. So winter compared to summer, their climb rate might be slower in summer. They'll groan a bit more as they climb, but it's not as a result of a procedural change.
Thank you.
Great. Right here. We have time for a couple more questions. We're out of time, but we'll keep going for a couple more questions to make sure we get your questions answered.
I live in Markland Wood. I'm interested in the lady's comment from Matheson, I think it was, who was suddenly getting aircraft noise and irritating her. I'm also interested in Robin's comment to that the Chapter 4 aircraft are now the thing at Pearson Airport, right? I would like to pick up on Colin Novak's comment of the usage of his data. Okay, at no time did he ever mention penalties, financial impacts of how pilots fly airplanes. And my comment to Robin is the last time I looked, and I stand to be corrected because it's a little while ago, your major airline in this airport is Air Canada. And in the Fly Quiet program out of Heathrow Airport, Air Canada was number 17 out of 50. Okay, so somehow or other, Heathrow Airport doesn't find Air Canada to be a sterling airline using its airspace, and it fines Air Canada money because it breaches the rules. Now, Transport Canada have got a levy on airline deviations, and it was a paltry amount of money. Okay, and so my question really to you, Robin, is when are you and Transport Canada going to get your act together and begin to penalise airlines who don't fly where they're supposed to be flying? If an aircraft is turning because a light aircraft is turning because there's a jet coming behind it, that is money, okay? But the penalty is being paid by the people who are having that quick turn aircraft give them noise. That's my comment.
There are a lot of questions actually in that comment that I'm going to look to my colleagues here at the table to help us work through. The first one was whether aircraft fly according to procedure and how that enforcement process works. And maybe Clifford, you want to speak that? Or, but I just want to note that all aircraft that fly in and out of Toronto Pearson are monitored to ensure that they are flying to procedure. 100% of the aircraft are monitored. And any instance when they are not flying to procedure, we do an investigation to understand why. And if we can't come up with the reason why, such as say weather avoidance, then it is put forward to Transport Canada, and that process is fulsome, and the aircraft that fly out of here fly safely, and they adhere to how they need to operate here at Toronto Pearson.
Yeah, and once those non-compliances are reported to us, we do an internal investigation through our enforcement group. And as the evidence provides, if a fine is warranted, it's laid. Now, to the gentleman's point, I don't recall the exact numbers. I think they start at about 5,000 and up. So, you know, there's been discussion about how effective the level of fines are, and I think that's the point you're making. And I totally hear you in terms of, you know, the dollar amounts. But in terms of the process, if, you know, non-compliance is reported to us, we do an investigation, we lay fines if warranted.
Is the noise monitoring data being used in that way?
Noise monitoring data is not used for enforcement.
Because at international airports where there is noise enforcement regulations, and the key is regulations, governments in those places like Australia, the UK or wherever, they actually have regulations which dictate how the airport will work. Pearson Airport is unique in the world. There are no real government regulations that are governing it.
The noise, and Clifford, maybe you want to actually leave this to you, really, it's about regulation, but Transport Canada regulates aircraft at source. So that is our regulation. So it isn't a decibel reading, or it is at the aircraft source.
Yeah, so there are a number of things in that. First of all, like you say, Robin, ICAO have noise measurements on any particular aircraft. So when a company like Boeing or somebody, de Havilland, Bombardier, designing an aircraft, then that is tested to ICAO standards, and a noise level is attributed to that aircraft. Now, there are variations depending on the type of engine it has, et cetera, et cetera. But there are noise levels that get attributed to a particular aircraft. That's done at a worldwide level. But in addition to that, what I wanted to mention in terms of regulations, we have regulations in terms of the aircraft itself. We also have regulations that apply at Pearson as other airports as well that deal with adherence to noise abatement procedures. So those procedures are published, and the expectation is that they would be followed in accordance with the regulations. And if they're not, like I say, they get reported to us and we follow up on that. So there are a number of regulations that apply to airports and specifically as well to Pearson that we look at.
I would just like to say to that the same aircraft designed by Boeing are flying into Heathrow, and the same aircraft designed by Boeing are flying into Sydney. But the governments of Sydney and the governments of the UK, or government of Australia, I should have gone beyond that in order to protect their citizens. And Transport Canada does not seem to be interested in protecting citizens. It's interested in protecting airlines. So it takes a convenient way of interpreting the data.
I would say, I'd just like to respond to that, because I'd like to make it clear that our regulations when it comes to noise and the adherence to noise abatement procedures are very consistent worldwide with the worldwide community. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you're referring to is the ability for an airport to decide its clients, what type of aircraft the clients who serve the airline or serve the airport use. That's not a governmental decision. What we do from Transport Canada is we establish the rules that keep the aircraft and the general public safe. And if those rules aren't followed, then we enforce against them. But in terms of the day-to-day operation of the airport and which client you want to have and which type of equipment that client is going to be allowed to use, that's not the regulator's decision. So I just want to make that clear.
That's a significant difference. The significant difference is that Transport Canada has abrogated its responsibility to the citizens. That is what happened. Transport Canada has walked out of the area and has completely handed over to the transport to the Greater Toronto Airport Authority. But in those other jurisdictions, it is actually government who is saying how the citizens will be impacted by the airports. Go and read the regulations for Heathrow Airport. Go and read the regulations. And in fact, I can give you it for Sydney because I happen to have it here, right? No, it is a government responsibility to look after those things. It is not up to the GTAA to decide how we will be impacted. That is the government.
Okay, you've made your point and it's been recorded. So let's go to this. We're 10 minutes past. There's a
okay.
Next question, please.
Yep. So Mark Kuis, representing more than 40,000 concerned community members with regards to safety, the Community Alliance for Safety here at the airport. I got a couple questions, and I'll try to get through it as quickly as possible. The first one is a comment to Robin, and then maybe we can get an answer. So first of all, in the last two CENAC meetings, we've asked for a safety report. In the last meeting, you guys did a great job showing the incidents and the fines. I believe it was Joseph Swalnick who was presenting that from Transport Canada. I'm not sure why that's not here for the regular meetings, because that's what we've been asking for consistently on every one of these meetings. Also, with regards to CENAC, there was some changes to the format that are ongoing. We don't know what the outcome is. Hillary made a comment that things are coming, but I don't I don't think anything was commented on here. So again, Cass is going to ask one more time. We need to have a safety report, incident report, and have ability to have public dialogue about safety at the airport at this meeting or another one, with all the right parties in place. So we'll ask again. I think this is our third request. One of the reasons we're asking is, you know, simple incidents, not really simple. There's a trend that's going on this summer of airport employees trying to steal aircraft and go for a joyride. There was one incident today in Orlando with an American Airlines aircraft. They stopped the employee before they got there. There was an incident in June in New Zealand. And then unfortunately, there was a terrible incident in Seattle on August 2018 where the aircraft was crashed by the employee into a neighborhood. Fortunately, it was a forest, but we live in a heavily populated neighborhood. So I'd like to understand what the airport is doing specifically in this area to create security within their airport. It's not about gates at the door. It's about how do they survey their employees and make sure this doesn't happen here in the GTA.
Is there a response to that?
I think, oh, sorry, I didn't know it was directed at me. I think in terms of, I'm not familiar with all the details of the other incidents you referenced in terms of a trend of airport employees. I said I'm familiar with Seattle, but I'm not familiar with the other ones.
Airlines was today in Florida.
Fair enough, but I think
there
in
was
all cases,
and one in New Zealand in 2018. If you don't have an answer that's formalized, maybe you can either post something on your internet or bring a formalized answer to the next meeting. But this is a serious issue. It's not about keeping people outside the gate. It's people inside the gate.
Sure, fair enough. And I think in terms of the Seattle incident, it was a badged employee, just like myself.
Yep.
No different than me. So I think.
So what are we doing different to make sure it doesn't happen here?
Yep. So we'll get you an answer for that.
Okay. And that's, Robin, that's why I'd like to have this in the dialogue in these public meetings when we have all the right people in the room. Maybe we can learn from other places and do a better job here in Toronto. The second one is for Clifford. We had a chance to talk to your colleagues, Joseph Swalnick and Tamara Rudge, at the last meeting. We requested a face-to-face meeting on Yonge Street. They agreed. It's been rescheduled 3 times. So that was on June 21st. We're still waiting for a next suggested meeting. CAS really wants to have a meeting with these folks. We're quite genuine about the request, and I thought they were quite genuine about accepting the request. Could you please take a message back to your colleagues? And we're looking for a face-to-face meeting. And, you know, one of the biggest issues that we're concerned about, CAS, right now is on August 21st, Transport Canada made an approval to shift the responsibility of basically approving pilot status from Transport Canada to the airlines. I don't know if it's a good analogy, but it's like the truck driving companies approving the truck drivers. How are we getting to objective evaluations? I had a call the next morning with Kathy Fox, who's the chair of the safety board here in Canada, and she found out on the news the night before. So collaboration, consultation, discussions, even within government agencies, is not happening. So we are deeply concerned. We also have a few other concerns, but we'll save that for the meeting. Do you have a comment with regards to this August 21st change?
Not specific on the August 21st change, because I'm not familiar with what you're speaking on, but in terms of the meeting with Joe Swalek and Tamara Rudge, there was one rescheduling of that because of scheduling conflicts. I know that Joe Swalek's admin assistant reached out to you both on the phone and by email and provided 3 more dates for you and asked you to let us know which one would be applicable. I didn't see a response on that, so if you did respond, then I'll check again. But I even checked up to today, and we were still waiting on a response from you to say which of those dates. I think it was September 5th, 12th, and 13th that we provided as possible dates, and we haven't responded, so or heard a response. So you're saying that you've responded and picked one of those dates or provided a date?
So as I said, I think there's a genuine agreement between both parties to meet.
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe there's a little bit of telephone tag going here, but it wasn't happening. So I'm putting my hand up again and saying, let's just pick a date in September and meet.
Yeah, my understanding was, and that's why I say if you've responded to us, I'd look for that response. My understanding as of today is that we were waiting on you to let us know which of those dates would work.
Do you have any? Canada to the airlines for approving, the status of the pilots?
No, I'm not familiar with that issue. Maybe we can talk offline on it. But yeah, I'm not sure which specifics, so that's why I'm not in a position to comment.
Well, with an intention to wrap up this meeting, let's, you can have some after meeting discussions. So let's go back here, and this will be the last question.
Just on that, though, before I leave it, so if you have a date that works for us, or we can collaborate on a date that works for both of us, yeah, because we certainly want to meet, and like I say, we've made attempts to get that done.
You can have one-on-one. Right after the meeting, you can have a discussion. Thank you. Last question of the night.
Thank you. It's Maria from Etobicoke again. So I've been having conversations with the GTAA Noise Management Office for the last year about the noise in our area. Similar to some of the residents here, I'm really glad that I have some support. I've been living in the same home for 20 years, and only as of this year, I've really experienced a change in not just the noise of the aircraft, but the frequency. And this is not just something that happens overnight. As I said, I didn't experience it one day and then all of a sudden it starts, and it's continued since. I know the Noise Management Office has all my complaints. There's post-it notes and pens everywhere in my house, on my iPad, on my phone. I write them down, I call, and what's most disturbing is that they'll start at 6:30 in the morning. It's 6:33, 6:36, and et cetera, et cetera. Yes, and so it'll start at 6:33, which I guess is okay now that we're all back to work, back to school. It's a great alarm clock for me, but the problem is that it doesn't end until after 12 a.m. So for me, that's only like maybe 6.5 hours worth of rest. For my children, that's only 6.5 hours worth of rest, and we're supposed to be getting at least 8 hours worth of rest. So that's not happening, and it's become more and more continuous. So you keep telling me when I call that you haven't changed the flight patterns. You tell me that it's from 6 left, that's my problem, and it's departures from 6 left. You tell me that I'm seeing them more often now because maybe the winds are pushing them further south, because they always used to fly over the 401 corridor. They're not doing that anymore. They're coming across Weston, they're coming across Dixon, they're coming across Lockheed, they're going across the Westway. Like, the air is just littered with airplanes. So what's happening that's different? Because it hasn't been like this in our area before. Are you allowing, Jonathan, you said something about you've imposed things that didn't need consultation. So are you allowing early turns? Because I'm noticing these planes are coming right across my backyard, and they're turning, they're going east, but they're turning to go south, or they're turning to go north, and I've never seen them turn like that before. And the way I can tell you that's different is because my house hasn't changed, my bedroom window hasn't changed, and I can see the red flashing light and the bright white lights all the time coming across while I'm trying to sleep. So what is that change that I never saw lights before, but now I'm seeing those lights?
Okay, the question is, what has changed?
Yeah, sure. I just want to address the point about because you mentioned the change that wasn't subject to consultation. I just want to address that first. That was a speed instruction on approach procedure. So my mic's still up.
It might have died.
So what that was a change to speed instruction on the downwind leg. It doesn't affect departures at all, and it was really something that so the community's actually experts and pilots had come up with, and the rationale behind that was if we increase the speed on the downwind, there'll be less use of devices to create drag to slow down the airplane. So, point aside, that was not it was not something that was subject to change, because that didn't change the flight path. It's not what you're observing. It's not related. I know Cynthia and I spoke earlier. She mentioned some of the things that you observed specifically. We did look at some traffic. Certainly, the procedures have not changed in a systematic manner. Now there are things like, Robin mentioned growth or things like that, tactical management of traffic, but the procedures are the same. So there are the early turns. It seems like you're located between aircraft going straight out on runway heading and those turning, and you're somewhere right in the middle there. So both those procedures neither of those procedures are new. Now, runway utilization could be something. So if we have a period where we're departing towards the east more, obviously you would see them more on departure. Weather related, again, not procedure related. So those things might help explain it, but there was no fundamental systematic change that would explain it.
So is there an opportunity for an offline sort of look at the traffic?
Sure, and Cynthia and I can chat with you after. We actually looked at your location earlier today. Yeah. Sure.
Excuse me, let's have one conversation. Yeah. We can't hear when 12 people are talking. So they're going to meet afterwards. The meeting is finished, sir. The meeting is finished, and we're going to turn it back over to the GTA to wrap up.
The question was clear. Is the same, neighborhood is the same, your policy is the same. How the NAP was saying increase dramatically in all these neighborhoods?
So they're going to sit down and look at it directly with this.
I mean, overall, there's a lot of different neighborhoods, and different neighborhoods experience different things. Some of you are here because you see arrivals, you're under the downwind leg. Some of you are here because you see departures. So it really depends. The answer will depend on your location. It's location specific. Overall, obviously, GTA is a growing airport, so there has been traffic growth over time. Some of that's been absorbed by larger aircraft. So instead of passenger numbers are growing, but yeah, right. It's everything.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely, and information and understanding is key. Absolutely, you're asking very technical questions that are very difficult to answer without a map, and I think they're very fair questions. And I think it makes sense for a couple of options. I think we can commit to the next CENAC. We will explore with Holland and with our colleagues at NAV Canada about doing a kind of a quadrant approach to the different areas around the airport. What is the typical operation that community would experience, as well as readings from the noise monitors, so that you can have that baseline information. And then we'll also sort of and share those procedures. And I think that'll be an important understanding. So we'll commit to doing that at the next CENAC. It's very difficult, sir, to answer these questions. There have, as we've mentioned, there have been no procedural changes, short of the weekend runway alternation program that Nick spoke to. That was very specific when that was being implemented and how that might be experienced. Sure.
So there's no need for.
No, there's neighborhoods somewhere that are happy about this.
No, it's very challenging.
No, but that's what I'm saying. No, not here. They're not here. The people who want this aren't here.
Okay.
They don't go outside.
The lady from Tang just has one brief comment.
I just have one question because you were supposed to get an update on the number of Air Canada planes that have been retrofitted, and I haven't heard it. How many have been retrofitted thus far? Right.
Have we yours, Jim?
Yeah.
Sorry, Sandra, to your question, we did receive a letter from Air Canada. There are five so far retrofitted. We will put that letter on our website. So you can see that.
Only 5?
Yep. And Transport Canada has indicated that they are reaching out to Air Canada to get a better idea of the timeline and the next steps.
Well, I would hope Air Canada would now put some pressure on, because 5 is ridiculous, you know.
So yeah, we're just in the outset of building our quieter fleet incentive program. No, fair, but it did have an 18 months to 2 year timeline. I know it's very frustrating, but it is a piece of work that is ongoing. I think on that note, I just want to say thank you everybody for coming tonight.
Very important question to the Transport Canada. No, it relates to everybody in this room. What can we do? Can you run a survey or campaign with a local sign so Transport Canada can take over and behave like the Toronto airport will behave as a, other countries, normal, civilized countries behave, and they protect their citizens. The next question is, and I ask you to decide without going left and right, I will go house from house and sign.
We did 3,000.
We did 500 flyers.
We did 3,000.
It's 20 minutes from the airport, and I have planes 3,000 feet over my house. It's closing 2.5, 3,000 over my house.
Leaside has
It's not
3,000.
airport area. It's far away. What is the regulation? What are they saying? What can we do to change that?
It's not your question.
Nothing.
Actually paying.
Things move again.
So anything that you have a proposed change for, anything that you want us to consider, certainly write it into us. We will look at it. We would reach out to any folks that we need to consult with, whether it's NAFCAN or whether it's the airport, whether it's our own colleagues in headquarters. Certainly.
I don't understand.
Yeah, or send us an email or anything, but we would need to understand what it is that you're proposing as a change that you'd like us as a federal government to enact, and we will certainly look at it.
People first.
Eh?
People first.
These regulations.
Public. I email you answer me back.
I think the point is made. I just want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I know it is very frustrating and difficult to have these conversations, but I just want to thank you all for your time and for your interest. Sandra and Rini, who are our residents and people we have worked with for a number of years, can talk to you about what it's like and the 6 ideas that we spoke to tonight, the 6 ideas in the presentation that Nick made are all based on ideas that came from the community, and they want things that we wanted it to explore, and so that's how this action works. And I just reiterate, there are no quick answers or there are no easy wins. Again, the region is growing, the demand for travel is growing, the demand for the growing economy and the opportunities are growing, and we have to balance that. And we have to balance that with running a good airport and working to be a good neighbor. So the best thing you can do is when you come to these meetings and we begin to explore ideas together and things that we could be studying to do differently, like at other airports, we have a whole program to do that going forward. But the airport isn't going anywhere and the planes aren't silent. Our next meeting is on December 6th, but I know many of you are interested in the weekend runway alternation program and that feedback, so we will be sure to follow up to make sure that you know where that feedback form is available. Thank you all.